Alright, so the ditch lights obviously were an issue with both of the engines, so I had the same fix on both of them, and that's that I went with the surface mounts in place of that light piping. And also, just want to show you here too, this is a small section of the factory LED pad that's up in the front of the engine to try to power that light piping. Doesn't really work. I mean, the LEDs on here work, it just doesn't really manage to pipe any of that into the light piping. Perhaps if they were bigger, or the light piping itself was bigger, that would work. Or even better yet, if it was just a straight shot, it would have worked as well. But having all those bends in there just causes a problem. So other than the LEDs on these, I had a problem with both of the engines in reverse. There was just awful squeaking in the drivetrain. Really, really bad. It sounded like, you know, somebody that had a 30-year-old car that needed everything greased. Just really, really bad. And I initially thought that it was the motor, but I actually went to the trouble of taking apart one of my other Genesis engines. Stole the motor out of this guy, plopped it in there, and had the exact same problem. So it was not a motor issue as I initially thought it was. It was actually a problem with the trucks themselves. I flipped around one of the axles about 180 degrees and it fixed it entirely on one engine, and on the other one it just caused even more of a problem. And I tried breaking these in. I ran them each for probably at least 10 hours. I spent most of the week kind of on and off during the day, just flipping directions and letting them run and run and run and run. Didn't really seem to minimize the problem. And it was worse in one engine than what it was in the other. One of these engines runs really, really smooth and quiet. Well, as quiet as what Athearn Genesis is. The other one's still a little bit on the grindy and noisy side, but both of these are much, much better than when I initially unboxed them. And it was not a lubrication issue. I pulled apart pretty much the entire truck, down to the bare gears, rebuilt both of them, still had the same problem. And it was not a lack of lubrication. I tried two different types of oil and one different type of grease. No difference on any of them as far as the loudness or the smoothness of it. So that was a problem. But again, it wasn't a motor problem. It's still a drivetrain related issue that causes the noise, but it's not the motor. Some of the other problems I had was some detail related things. Just as some others have pointed out on YouTube, mine arrived with the one eye bolt here, but it's missing it in the other 3 places that it's supposed to be. There's also some eye bolts on the radiator section here. Supposed to be 4 of them, 2 up front here on either side and 2 on the back. One of my engines has all 4, the other one just has 2 of them. So I'm going to have to order some eye bolts from Athearn. I'm going to also order 2 truck assemblies as well. And hopefully that fixes the drive issue. I also experienced a decoder failure in one of my ESU decoders, which this is the decoder that I used. Standard 21-pin decoder, Locksound 5. The motor control would just kind of stop about every 5 minutes. And then I reprogrammed it with the SD80 sounds, and it seemed to work fine for probably about 12 hours worth of constant runtime, and then the motor functions just completely died. Just completely unresponsive. So fortunately I had a spare decoder in there, plopped it in the other engine, and that seems to be running now. Didn't have any other LED failures anywhere on the engines. As far as the speakers, I went with this ESU kit. And I chose the 16 by 35, which I also had some failures with as well. I guess from being kind of bounced around in this packaging, 2 of my speakers were damaged, so the speakers are kind of crackly a little bit on one of these. Probably can't notice it on camera. You really only notice it if you're kind of putting your ear up close to it. The one engine is flawless, the other one's just a little bit crackly. So I'm going to have to find a different 16 by 35 solution for that. Thinking about trying, I believe TCS WOW has a speaker for that, and I really like their speakers, so I'd like to give that a shot. Moving on, I'm trying to think if there was any other issues that I ran into that it was mainly the drive and the LEDs is kind of what made this really, really bad. And, you know, what made it time consuming is I would just try one thing and then move on to another thing. And you know, I just kept on going through the process of elimination. Swapping out the motors on these involves really kind of destructing most of the engine. You really have to take pretty much all of it apart to get to that part. And, you know, that didn't really fix the problem. You know, if it was something as easy as swapping out the motor, I would have been happy. Unfortunately, it was a little more involved than that. And getting to these gearboxes is probably worse than changing out the motor itself. Also, in terms of detail, on a couple of the engines, I did knock off these little yellow grab irons a couple times. I've managed to re-glue them back on. Also, on one of my engines, there's a little grab iron that's supposed to be up here. One of them has it, the other one does not. I was also missing one of my eye bolts on top of one of these, and I actually found it on my foam cradle. So I guess in the process of having it flipped on its lid for a couple minutes, one of them fell out, but somehow I managed to find it and put it back in. You can kind of see here, maybe. This is one of the radiator eye bolts that I found laying on my phone. Actually, that was in the Athearn box. I can probably re-glue that in there, which putting these eye bolts in is not very much fun at all. You're literally threading the needle. And the fact that the engine's black does not help either. I don't have shaky hands, but it's definitely something that you really need the hands of a surgeon to really get right. And it's especially dangerous because you have glue, so if you don't manage to poke the right spot, you're putting a glue mark on your engine. So I don't know what the best advice for that is. You know, find somebody with a steady hand and good eyes is probably my best advice there. Next thing I want to point out here is I did get rid of the sorry plastic couplers and replace them with KDs. And on one of the engines, I did go with a longer coupler, and the purpose for that is so that it can clear turns a little bit easier. And we're looking at 24-inch radius here, which actually isn't too bad. But on some more narrow radius, these will actually start to bump pilots in a corner. So it gives you a little bit extra clearance. And if we look at it on a straightaway here, it's actually not too bad. I mean, the engines are still pretty close together. It looks still nice. I did not seem to find any painting or graphic issues or paint application issues. I didn't seem to knock off any paint on the grab irons or really break much off of the engine, which is impressive given the fact that I had this thing in just so many pieces over the last couple days. I'm also very proud of myself for actually putting the things back together in one piece again and not having any extra parts laying over. So that's pretty good. So I think that's about it for a lot of the things that I fixed. I might be forgetting something, but the main issues were the drivetrain noise and intermittently not running. The intermittently not running, again, was because of the decoder, not the engine's fault. And then, of course, the ditch light issue. So those things seem to be fixed. As far as if you're buying these with a Tsunami 2 decoder in them, you may still run into the noisy drivetrain issues. You know, I don't know if that is more of an issue with necessarily the Norfolk Southern versus the Conrail. The drivetrain's the same in both of them, so I would think that that issue is still prevalent in some other models as well. Initially, I had plans of buying the other two Conrail units because I did want two Conrail and two NS. For reasons I'll discuss later, I'm not going to do that. So we'll wrap this part up here and then start to get into running these and talking about some of the performance aspects of them. Okay, so let's talk about some of the operating aspects of this engine. I'm not going to go and do any speed tests, but I will tell you some of the results that I have with my digital speedometer. These hit a maximum of about 78 to 80 miles an hour depending on the engine, which is pretty good. As you know, on some previous videos I mentioned it, but I scale all of my engines to a top speed of 70 miles an hour, and then I make the kind of the mid throttle point 35 miles an hour so that they all kind of play nice with each other and all run the same speeds. As far as slow speed, having a little bit of an issue with my speedometer. I think the batteries need change, but this was hitting right around 1 mile an hour, and we'll hit speed step 1 here just to show you. You can see it's nice and slow. It wasn't that way out of the box. It did take some tuning. And we'll go ahead and back it up here a little bit. And this engine is a whole lot quieter when I first got it. I'll let you listen to this here as it kind of spools up. And you can get a sense for how kind of noisy it is. This engine is a little bit more noisy than 7211, which is the other one. So we're fully maxed now. And that gives you some idea as to how noisy this thing is. It's just not a very quiet drive. And I've, of course, programmed my ditch lights to flash. And again, I'm running ESU5 with an ESU5 file that's appropriate for the 80MAC. Next, I want to highlight some differences between this and the Kato model. I kind of wish that I didn't sell off my Kato models just yet. That way I could have had a side-by-side comparison for you. But there are some videos of my old ones on my channel, so you can check those out. But I'll tell you about some of the differences here. First of all, one with the Kato models, you don't get the painted steps. Now that's something that you can do on your own. I did it fairly easily on mine. Also, of course, you don't get the silver tipped MU hoses. Again, something you can do on your own. The little MU cable up here up front and the brake hose, something that does not come with the Katos, as well as the plow that's on the Kato is not accurate, but you can update those things as well. Also, the color that's on the railings is accurate on this model, where it is really not on the Kato, but I did paint mine to be this color on my Kato. The windshield wipers are kind of accurate to scale on this one, whereas on the Kato, all the details are kind of a little bit oversized. Not that that's a problem though, because they're extremely durable, so that's kind of a benefit in a way. Also, the markers on these are kind of blacked out as they should be, whereas the lenses themselves are still red on the Kato, but they don't light up, so it's not really too much of an issue. It is kind of nice if you wanted to actually make working marker lights, you could do so on the Katos. Of course, the ground lights, that's a feature that's unique to these engines. Not many in HO in general have that. Something you could probably add if you wanted to. Roof detail, there's a lot more detail on these versus the Katos. There's virtually no roof detail on those. The paint itself on all Athearn models is a very flat black. There's not really any gloss in it. Whereas the Kato does have kind of a semi-gloss finish, which I think does look a little more realistic for these engines. Just because a lot of these had pretty fresh paint on them. especially the engines in particular that were on CSX that NS acquired later, which there was 30 engines in all that Conrail originally had, and then NS got 17 of them, and then CSX got the remaining 13, but it was in, I think, 2014, Norfolk Southern acquired all of the other ones and did repaint them all. So a lot of those engines were only on the road a couple years, so they had pretty shiny paint on them. Something I would have liked to see them do on these models was maybe just a little more of a glossy paint job. Not a huge thing, but something I would have liked to have saw. Along the back here, and in particular on the sides, this little railing back here is yellow. I did that on my models just to make it a little closer. On the very back, there's the little extra knuckles on here, which I did not have on my Kato, but there really wasn't any room to put it there. And of course, the MU hoses and cabling there, which again is something you can add, but these have it out of the box. And I don't really think you can see it too well, but there is some see-through detail here, which is kind of cool. You kind of have to look at it in certain light in order to be able to see it. As well as on the Kato, this part here is generally not painted. Very easy to do on your own. In terms of drive, these have probably a little bit better weight than what the Katos do. The Katos were certainly much more of a quiet, smoother runner for sure. Definitely a lot easier to work on. The shells are extremely easy to get apart on any Kato model in general. It's just an easier model to kind of unbox and live with on a day-to-day basis, where these are a little more hyper detailed and hyper scaled. They definitely look the part, but the performance is maybe not quite as great out of the box as what you get on the Kato. Internally, most of what you see in there is kind of all weight, tons and tons of wires in there. I could never really find a speaker setup that I was really happy with on my Katos, so I always had a lot of shell rattle. That's something I'm very happy to report on these, is that you don't really have that. And being that it uses that standard 16 by 35 speaker in the rear, very easy to switch out to something that you can test through experimentation that would work right for you. Like I said, I had mixed results. Some of my speakers were defective through no fault of the companies that made them, but through some of my handling and not taking so good a care of them when I had them packed away, that caused some problems for me. I set mine up to run as a pair, so they're all speed matched, and I have 7217 set as the leader, and then I got 7211 as the trailing unit. No particular reason why, probably other than I like the horn that's on a little bit better on 7217 because it's an RS3L, whereas this has a K5LA, and I have dozens of other engines that have that in it, and I'm just kind of tired of that horn, so I wanted to hear something different. But these engines together just look fantastic. Pictures really don't do it justice, but it's so long between the two of these put together. It's just 10,000 awesome horsepower of fury. So there you have it, folks. I would say for the last half of this video, I had a lot more fun making it than the first half of this video, for sure. I seem to have conquered all of the problems, or most of the problems that I had. So we'll see if the truck replacements kind of finishes off these locomotives. Hopefully it does. It's only been a day, but I haven't heard back from Athearn just yet for the parts department. I'll probably do a follow-up video to see how that goes and if any of these fixes are successful. So just in closing, a couple things touching over the locomotive here. Lighting is great, with the exception of the ditch lights. It's just, everything else is completely great. I really love the truck lighting feature. I think that's probably the coolest aspect of this locomotive. So for those of you who do like night scenery, or something where you're kind of depicting a scene in the middle of the night, these engines are perfect for that. And just the way they look, I mean, these are so much more fun to run than some Dash 9s. So these are one of the cooler Norfolk Southern engines. They're some of my favorites. So that's why I spent a little bit extra time on this, and probably why I was a little bit more emotional and expecting something great out of the box. I mean, as far as the details on these, Athearn still continues to use very delicate plastic. So it is very easy to break something, unfortunately, on these locomotives. The drive continues to be the noisiest in the business. You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody that makes a noisier locomotive than these. And that's just, I mean, you saw it here on video. I have plenty of other examples of Athearn engines. They're just the noisiest of the bunch. Even most Bachmanns are quieter than these. So they continue to up the price on these engines. They up the detail. They give you more lighting features, but they refuse to fix the drive, which has been my #1 complaint of Athearn Genesis engines for 6 years. So, we'll see if they ever decide to upgrade that in the future. Maybe we'll have to wait for Genesis 3.0. That being said, these are fairly expensive locomotives. The street price on these is right around $212 for the non-sound version that's DCC ready, and for the sound versions, which have Tsunami 2 in them, which I don't think that sound file sounds as good as the ESU that's in these. Those units are around $288, give or take a couple dollars on each one, but that's generally the cost of them, which is among the most expensive models that you'll find on the market. So, at least in terms of diesels. So there's really not much that's more expensive than these, and you would think for something that is the most expensive, it would kind of check off all the boxes as being the best. But that's simply not the case here. And initially I thought with these coming out, it would really take away the relevance of the Kato models. And I think the Kato models are still a very relevant option. And the reason being is that they're just more economical. They were around $130 new for a DCC ready model. Granted, you need to do some work to it to bring it up to this level, but it's not impossible. But I don't know that these are $80 better than what the Kato models are. In my opinion, they're not. So, with that being said, now that I've fixed a lot of the issues with them, I'm fairly happy with them, but I'm still not happy with the price of them. I really thought that Athearn had their quality control under control, just because the last couple releases have been very solid. I was very happy with my SD70M flared radiators. All of my SD60Es were flawless. I was blown away with the quality on the ready-to-run SD40 that had Economy built into it, just because I was not expecting that to be really good, and it was fantastic and very good for the money. These, I wouldn't necessarily buy these unless you follow a few things. One, if you are getting these from anywhere that isn't online and you have an option to potentially run them at your local shop before you pick them up, I suggest that you do so. Make sure that they don't have an issue prior to bringing it home. If you're ordering online, make sure the retailer that you're dealing with has, a good return policy if necessary. And, also, if you don't necessarily want to go through the dealer, make sure that you're knowledgeable on how to work on locomotives. I think for most people that do a lot of the things that I do in rebuilding these and taking them apart, doing your own DCC installs, you could probably fix most of the issues. But, you know, if you're not someone that likes to take the shell off your locomotives and mess with them, these may not be the right ones for you. Or in that case, I would suggest probably going with the Tsunami 2 versions, because then there's less that you need to do as long as it's a working model out of the box. And I was thinking about getting the Conrail versions of these as well, but I'm not going to do that just based on the experience that I've had with these two locomotives. I really don't feel like going through that again with additional locomotives. So my hope is that Athearn recognizes some of the problems that they've had on this run and fixes them, so hopefully a next run is better. And if there is a next run of them, then I would consider picking up the Conrail versions. So in spite of these being probably the most problematic pair of locomotives that I've bought brand new out of everything that I've ever purchased, I do still love them because I love the 80MAC. And now that I've worked out a lot of the issues, I've really had a lot of fun over the past couple days running them and listening to them and just kind of witnessing the awesome power of them. So that's about it for this video, but you know, I just want to leave you with the fact that you need to be buyer beware on this. Be vigilant. Understand your purchase before you buy it. Try to test it out before you buy it. Make sure that if you're not necessarily someone who's knowledgeable on fixing them, make sure you have some sort of avenue to do that. You know, maybe a friend that does DCC installs, your local shop. Have somebody in your network that's capable of doing that, because if I had problems with 2 out of 2, and I know some people that have had other problems with these out of the box, there's a pretty good chance that you may have issues as well. If I only had one issue with these and the other one was perfectly fine, then maybe I'd be a little bit more convinced that it necessarily wasn't a wider problem, but I think that there's a good amount of these that are going to have the same issues that I did. And hopefully here I've showed you some of the things that you can do to fix them. So that's about it for this one. I had a lot of fun making it. I'm hoping to do some more cinematic type things in these train videos coming up. Maybe start to learn some editing software so that I'm not just rambling on and have crappy lighting and very unstable video. So hopefully it improves here moving forward. So that's it for this one, guys.